Hello, beautiful vegans. Welcome to Empowered Vegans, a show that inspires and empowers vegans to live their best lives. Hosted by me, vegan empowerment coach Mariquita Solis. Each week, I feature leading experts in the vegan and plant based world, sharing inspirational stories, practical tips, and empowering conversations. My mission is to support the vegan community in living a fulfilled, joyful life while making a positive impact on the world. I'm a transformational coach and I'm starting a group coaching program in November. And we're going to be focused on the wisdom of animals, learning from the animals, their resilience, their power, their joy at life and living. And it's going to be exciting. So please DM me for that information. And please, if you're watching, give StreamYard permission to use your name and get your questions in the chat, because I want to welcome my wonderful guest, Reverend Sarah Bowen. She is going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about tips for coping with empathetic distress as animal advocates, and how to meditate with animals to improve well-being for both. And also about the many questions about religion and animals, religion and
let's get into the mess. Yeah.
Right. What is that? Right. So thanks for coming, Reverend Sarah.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Mariquita. It's so nice to be with you today. And I love these kind of conversations about what we can do to help sustain ourselves in the work that we're doing, knowing that everyone's doing a little bit of a different piece of the puzzle to try to improve the situation for animals and habitats and people. And so I am so delighted to come and share my piece of the puzzle.
Wonderful. Well, you know what? Could you start us off with a little prayer?
I sure could. And know that when we're doing prayer, I like to call it prayer-ish, so that we can include all the folks who say, wait, hold on, I don't pray, or I meditate, or I'm atheist, or I'm agnostic. That the tradition of prayer we find in indigenous cultures, we find it in religious cultures, we find it in spirituality. I even pray with atheists. So, what it really is just a little bit of a centering moment for us. We might use that language instead, just a centering moment to bring us into this present moment that we're having together. It doesn't require any kind of divine idea if that's not something that's comfortable for you. If it is something that's comfortable for you, go for it. All right, here we go.
Okay.
So let's just take a deep breath together. Breath is something that connects all of us. It connects us to all living creatures, all living beings, all beingness on the planet. It's the one thing that we share. And so as we bring our minds to our breath, we bring our minds to our bodies, our spirits, our hearts, every part of us, in gratitude that we've taken this time out today to learn more about how to stay well balanced, how to stay on track, how to deal with difficult emotions and complex ideas in a community that supports us, a virtual community combined of people from all over, and led today by these two souls who hope we have some interesting things for you to hear. We put aside for a moment all the things that are tugging at our hearts and our to-do lists and our, oh God, I forgot to do that. It will be there when we're done. And we take another breath together. And breathe our eyes open.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Always good to start with a little prayer-ish.
Right. I love that prayer-ish. Yes. And so tell me about your background as a child. Were you very religious, very spiritual? I don't even know what the word religion means.
I came to all this kicking and screaming, folks. No, I was a Presbyterian preacher's kid. So I was that kid. I was that kid with the funny hair and the funny clothing, who was rebellious and rebucking everything. And my father was so wonderful with me because he was not someone who was rigid in his call to religion. He was someone who was trying to help people and help communities. And he was very interested in religion and spirituality as a way to seek justice and as a way to support people and to spread compassion. So I don't have any horror stories from that, but I did have this kind of growing up seeing a lot of the things my father was doing for people not being extended to animals. And I was really into animals. We had cats in the house, and there were squirrels and chipmunks and birds outside and dogs at the neighbors and cows at grandpa's farm, and different kind of beings that were all around me. And I was wondering how these things that I was taught in church, or that my dad was involved in, he was working on fair housing for people, he was working on trying to help people who were living in poverty, all these kind of things, right? So I had this call to justice and call to help, but it also had this animal piece. So I was this kid who on the way home from school would find little dead chipmunks or little squirrels who'd been hit on the side of the road, or cicada skins, or whatever I was curious about at the time. And I would put them in my lunchbox, and I would take them home, and I would put on my dad's clergy shirt, and I would give them a burial. And I would end the burial, digging up mom's rose bushes, right? And I would end the burial with, "May the force be with you, chipmunk," because I, had learned all my spirituality from Star Wars and from Yoda, in addition to dad at church. And I just had these questions. And so as I grew up and became an animal advocate and got involved in different questions of justice, those questions stayed with me. And I had a fierce atheist decade, where I was very angry about some of the things that I saw churches doing and other religious institutions doing. And then in this weird paradoxical kind of thing, when my father died, I found myself with all of his life's work, and trying to understand it led me to go to seminary. And I was very surprised to find myself in a seminary, folks. Very, very, very surprised. But as I did, and I unpacked my father's life's work, it brought forth my life's work, which is to help people in interspecies issues, in issues of the animal. And that can be a lot of different things. I will probably dig into what that means, some of those kind of things. But, I really work in those areas where humans and habitats and animals often find friction. And how do you help with that friction? Whether it's people who have compassion fatigue, or veterinarians who are way too many of them falling to suicide right now because of their work, or it's vegans who can't walk out of their house without having empathetic distress, or it's someone who just lost a dog. Yeah.
Wow.
That's in a nutshell. What do we want to unpack from there?
Well, I'd like to know, what about your mom?
Oh, that's a great question. My mother was a teacher. So my mother's contribution, she taught me to read early. and so, that has been something that has been great for me in terms of, being a critical thinker, and being able to understand that there are a lot of different perspectives, or a lot of different ways. The Jains call it many-sidedness. That we're not to be kind of stuck in dogma, or stuck in my way is the right way, but to be able to understand critical thinking. My father's gone now. My father's been gone. He was taken entirely too young at the age 65. My mother's still around, and mom and I have all sorts of really interesting conversations about animal issues. We don't technically see eye to eye on a lot of things, but she has a willingness to learn, and I have a willingness to try to share my experience compassionately, and we do the best we can.
I love that. That's beautiful. Yeah, and I love the Jains, the Jains religion, and and it's funny that we talk about that. I mean, like when I think about religion, I don't even want to be boxed into anything. And what does religion mean? If to most people, I mean, to most people, what would you say? And what does religion mean? And what does it mean to you?
Oh, that's such a great question. The word religion in essence means the same thing that the word yoga means, which surprises some folks. It means to bind or to connect. And so religion started because people were binding themselves to each other in communities around certain ideas and certain practices. And a lot of those practices and ideas had to do with why is the world the way it was. And take yourself back thousands of years, right? When there are lightning storms that you don't understand, and there are droughts and you have no food and you don't understand, and there are wild beasts who are coming and dragging off your children and you don't understand. And so stories were made and ideas happened and practices evolved in something that actually religion wasn't called religion until it started to be studied. It was just the way people lived. It was part of culture, were the beliefs that you had until we started studying it and calling it religion. So what happens now is for many of us is that we can be very hurt by some of the things that people within particular religious institutions make or have said to us. And what we do is project that onto this entire thing called religion, which is hard to define because it's so multivariate and multi-perspectived, and it isn't the same to everyone. And so it's almost a useless word. It's better to be specific. So instead of asking someone, are you religious? Because what does that mean? What does that mean to who? It depends. I'll often ask people, what are the beliefs that are important to you in your life? What are the practices that you do that are important? And that gives me a view of what of what's meaningful to them and what sustains them. So there's no doubt that the things that we call religions have been very harmful. And there's no doubt that they've also been very helpful. We have universities because of religion. We have many of the welfare organizations that started for animals came out of religious values, which is something we don't talk about very often, but it came because of what people thought about in their religious values. So it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. Just like government has the good and the bad and the ugly, and education has the good, the bad, the ugly, religion has the same. So I think it's important to be precise about what we're talking about. Does that help?
It
Or does
does
it
help,
make a
yes.
bigger mess, right? Does that make a
No,
bigger mess?
I like the way that you said it was to come together to bond, right? Like yoga.
Yeah, to bind around ideas or to connect to something. And what's fascinating? Okay, so let's talk about animals. Let's get beyond the people and talk about animals. So there have been a lot of people who have looked at spirituality in animals. So are animals spiritual? And I don't mean spiritual in like after they die, do they have spirits? I mean, do they have this type of connection that we call spirituality? And what that often means is the state that you have when you're at prayer, or the state that you have when you are meditating, or you're doing kirtan, or you're deep into yoga, or you're forest bathing, or whatever you do, folks, whatever you do that makes you feel that kind of piece of calmness, or how you deal with awe and wonder and that attempt to be in the present moment. Those are often ways we talk about spirituality or being in the flow. Do animals do that? And so there's been a body of literature that's come up now that says, yeah, we think they do. We think at least, and of course we have to unpack the word animals because we're talking about a lot of species and we're talking about a lot of different brain structures and lack of brains and body structures and that kind of thing. But what we've noticed is that there are different kinds of species and individuals within species who seem to behave as if they're having some of these same things that we call spirituality. So Jane Goodall started talking about primates, and a lot of other people have talked about the spirituality of primates, but we've also started to extend that to dogs, to cats, to horses, to beings who have the same kind of brain structures that we do, and looking at where our brains light up when people are in deep spiritual practice. And that part of the brain that lights up when we're having mystical experience, or we're having deep meditation, or we're really, really into something, we've lost ourselves right into the kind of allness, that animals, many species have that same brain structure and that same capacity. So it's kind of neat. When I teach a program for animal chaplains, and I also do a lot of workshops and teaching at universities and things. And we look at videos of one of my favorite is snow monkeys in Japan, who are kind of in this like hot water, and they're just kind of bursting bubbles in the water. and just kind of looking at each other, and they're going very slow, and they're just kind of hanging out, and they're super chill. It's like, what's going on in their mind? Clearly, they're not just sitting around waiting to, as science. Again, that's another word that's hard to define. What is science? It's trying to prove things, basically, is what science is. But we used to think that animals didn't have pain, right? Or that animals didn't think, or they didn't have empathy. We've disproved all of these things. So spirituality is the new piece. Do animals have spirituality? And that's kind of an interesting thing to try at home, and can be very, very helpful for us. If do you ever meditate with a dog?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
I feel yes.
How do you do your practice?
Well, I think it's really sitting outside in nature is when we do it. When we sit calmly and I just watch little Louie, and we really ground. And then also, like, I'm the leader of the animal ministry at my church. So then when we're in that guided meditation and all the animals are there and they're very quiet and respectful, right? It's not just the human animal. It's also all other living beings. Like, we went to the labyrinth walk last week, and as I saw Dave, who was leading us in a little meditation, I saw Sunny, who was my friend's dog, and she was just watching quietly, and I could feel that heart as she was connecting with Dave. It was beautiful.
Yeah, it is. And I think one of the things that can happen is we can have a belief that dogs and cats and anyone else that what we have as a companion, needs hyperstimulation, needs to be pet. We either need to be petting or playing or feeding or, et cetera, et cetera. And what we find is when we're able to spend time with them quietly, not having to touch them, not trying to have them soothe us. There's far too much literature right now telling us the benefits of animals for humans. And when we use our critical eye on that a little bit, it's like, yeah, but are they benefiting too? So we have to kind of look at some of those reports carefully. But when we're just sitting near an animal and we slow our breath. So for some people, the word meditation is a scary word. Like, I don't know how to meditate. I don't know how to stop my brain. Meditation isn't stopping your brain. So you get 60 to 70,000 thoughts per hour, or per day, 60 to 70,000 thoughts that are going through your brain. You're not going to be able to stop them. What we're doing is we're slowing them down and we're focusing them on something. And then, of course, all the other ideas come, and then you just slow it and focus. And then all the ideas come and they slow it. That's meditation, not like the complete I'm zenned out for an hour and no thought has passed my mind. So y'all can meditate. You can. And even if the crazy ideas are coming, you're still meditating. But to just be able to bring your breath down very slow next to a being, and you start to notice, like, you'll notice their breath starts to slow down as well, right? I have a skittish cat who came from a shelter, big shelter trauma. And he's normally kind of small and packed in, right, in kind of a scared format with his tail format, scared body position with his tail down. And when I start to just breathe slowly next to him, don't look at him in the eyes, right? Just kind of breathe and chill out, turn the television off. And he'll roll over on his back and get in that, that great, like, on the back, fully stretched out, chill position. So we can help other beings like that, and we can help ourselves by just learning to not be doing so much. And that's also really hard as activists and advocates, that it's hard to slow down, it's hard to stop, it's hard to not be doing, but it's really, really important to our mental health.
Yes, it is. You're right. And really grounding with the earth. I mean, we've got a beautiful earth that we can, like, I can be online all day long. And thank goodness I have my little Louie, who is like, we got to go out, so, because if I'm not touching trees, which sounds crazy, possibly, or really, going out and mindfully touch the bushes that I go by, right? To really try to bring myself back to earth, because we become so disconnected.
We do. They've talked about nature deficit disorder, right? And these other kind of things where when we started boxing ourselves into homes, we started removing ourselves from things that were important to us. And it's interesting, if you look back at spirituality and if you look back at religion, it's very connected to the earth. And and then we moved it into buildings, just like we moved ourselves into buildings. And we did that for safety. Right. There's reasons we did that. We did that for safety. We did that to get away from the weather elements. And then we discovered art and architecture and creating. God, I love a gorgeous cathedral. Like, you go in Sagrada Familia, which they've been working on 100 years in Italy and in Barcelona, excuse me. And, you go in, it's just amazing architecture. But you're right, getting out into nature. And nature can also be standing on a street corner next to a tree, talking to a pigeon. That's one of those important things I have to tell people, that they say, well, I don't have access to nature. I live in a city. It's all nature. So, you just have to find it. You have to find that weed. You have to find that beautiful plant that's coming up through the sidewalk. That's nature too, right? Being aware.
Yeah.
We all have access to nature.
That is so true. And even just going outside and breathing the air and feeling, that is nature, right? The breath that we take, right? It just being mindful of that.
It's again, yeah. And you're talking, mindfulness as a term has become something in the past, 30 to 40 years that's been kind of adjacent to spirituality, because it comes from religious traditions, but we've kind of taken away some things and added some other things to it and call it mindfulness. But that idea of being able to be present to our experience is important, and especially because those of us who are let's think about today. So I'm thinking about today because we're live, right? Mm-hmm. Today on my mind is an earthquake in Afghanistan. On my mind is what's going on between Israel and Palestine, between Russia and the Ukraine. I'm also been reading news stories about all of the birds that are hitting windows in Chicago while they're trying to migrate and dying because we don't shut our lights off, in our buildings. I've had 3 calls this morning about people who've lost companion animals. There's a lot of loss, and there's a lot of things that are heavy on my heart. And all of you who are with us today, or who are going to watch this in the future, hello, future people, that there is a lot that weighs heavy on our heart. And the balance to that is to be able to find joy and to find calmness and to find happiness in the midst of all of the mess and the suffering and the yuck. And that can feel a little prickly, like, how can I possibly feel happy? How can I possibly feel joyful? How can I possibly not feel depressed with everything that's going on in the world? But if we look at the people who have the most resiliency, I love to look at, the Dalai Lama or Desmond Tutu or some of these folks who have been through really, really great amounts of suffering in large communities. And then we see them, doing silly things. When those two get together, particularly if you Google Desmond Tutu, Dalai Lama, you'll see 2 grown men acting like 5-year-old children with each other and having a lot of fun. And they do that because that sustains their work. So we also have to be able to find good jokes and laughter, even as we're attending to the suffering of the world.
Exactly. But how do I give myself permission to be happy if there's so much suffering?
Because we don't see them as binaries. That's the problem. What we do is we create binaries of things. So there's religion and science, there's happy and sad, there's suffering and joy. And we see them as being on either ends of like some pole, and you can't be one without being the other. One of my most amazing mentors that I ever had was a man who would get up and start speaking, and he'd be telling some very funny joke. And within about 5 minutes, he was dropped into tears. And I thought, my God, he's got to get it together, right? He's crying in front of talking to all of us. And then he'd come up and then start talking about something and teaching us again. And then he's laughing and then he's crying. And it took a little while because I was confused. like, pick an emotion, pick an emotion. I don't know what to do with all of what you're sending to me. But what I realized, what he was modeling for us was the ability that emotions are like that they come and they go and they interweave with each other, and they can be layered on top of each other. Have you ever gotten the giggles at a funeral? I have. Someone tells a really funny joke and you're bereft that you've just lost your best friend, and yet someone has said something very, very funny and you've laughed. It doesn't mean you're not still sad. It doesn't mean that you're not still suffering. It means that we as humans have the ability to have a complexity of a lot of emotions at the same time. And that when we force ourselves to, I cannot be happy, because how can I be happy when there is so much suffering in the world? That is a perfect recipe, folks, for burnout. Perfect recipe for burnout. So we need to be able to do both. And we also see, it's really interesting, if you read stories or memoirs of people, for example, who have been in captivity for a long time, or who have been in persecuted communities, you will see that amidst them dealing with unbelievable hardship, they take time to have ritual together. They take time to have joy together. They celebrate babies being born, even when there are, gazillions of humans that are dying. So, it really is what builds resilience. Does that answer? It's about building resilience. It's not about saying it's an either or kind of emotion.
No, I love that, definitely, because a lot of people, I hear that all the time. I'll never be at peace. I'll never be happy. I'll never be happy until every animal is free, But I mean, so I remember reading the Dalai Lama's book on happiness, which really helped me get it. And there's always going to be suffering. I mean, when we understand there's always going to be suffering, when I accept it, I accept everything's not going to go my way, then and I know that people are going to get sick. I know I'm going to get sick. I know people are going to die. That's part of life. Then I can just allow, and I can reach a greater level of happiness or acceptance. So that's what really helped me, is just not denying this. That's part of living and part of life.
It is. And I think what we might be trying to say when we're saying I can't be happy while they're suffering, to animals, to humans, to the earth, whatever that is, that whatever group we're talking about. I think what we're trying to express is our heartbreak. I think we're trying to express that our hearts are broken. And so being able to say, I'm having a hard time being happy when there's so much suffering going on, is a first step. I'm having a difficult time finding joy, knowing about the billions of animals who are suffering right now. And I'm having a hard time feeling like I can have moments, right? We're not talking about a perpetual happy state. Any of y'all have a perpetual happy state? Tell me how you got there. But we're talking about moments of joy or moments of lightheartedness. Now, we see animals, even animals who are in the midst of great suffering and captivity, also have their own moments of lightheartedness and their own moments of trying to cope with the situations that they're in. So we see that even animals understand that they're trying to find moments of peace or moments of calm amidst the mess that we force them to live in. And that may be hard to hear. But we will see, and we'll see them comforting each other. We'll see dairy cows that comfort each other after the things that happen to dairy cows are done to them, right? We'll see animals stroking each other. We'll even see, moments of animals who are in shelters and living in very small square cages still have moments of joy and play with each other. So remembering that we can have all of that. Now, so what I would change, that I can't be happy until all the animals aren't suffering, is I won't stop my commitment until the animals aren't suffering. There's a difference in there. There's a difference in
Right.
there. I'm going to find joy. I'm going to find calmness. I'm going to find moments of things to sustain me so I can work even harder on that commitment, because I have resilience and I'm not sick and I'm not suicidal or depressed or unable to function because of the amount of grief that I'm carrying. Because that's what we're carrying. We're carrying grief.
Right. And even just saying, you know what, I'm not okay with this. I mean, we're not okaying it. You know, if we laugh,
No.
right? You know, right.
That's why it's almost called radical joy. Like, how can you have joy in the midst of heartbreak? How can
Right.
you? How can you?
I'm not saying everything's wonderful. I'm saying,
Yeah.
yes, I don't agree with that, but I'm going to empower myself the best way. And that means laughing, and it means taking those glimpses of joy, right? Like you're
It
saying.
is. And I think what it is it's a more, we have stages. We have stages when we do advocacy or when we do activism. And in our beginning stages, as our eyes are opening to what's going on in the world, it can start to feel so overwhelming. And so, Claire Mann speaks of dystopia for people who have just become vegans. I have a friend who says, it's a good thing that we don't learn everything all at once, or our heads would just shoot off. Right. The amount of heartbreak that we feel at the beginning of this journey is immense, and not to be understated. Really, it's immense. It's real. It's valid. It hurts. It is hard. As we look at people who've been in advocacy and activism over a long time and haven't burnt out and are still doing it, if we look to those people and say, well, what are they doing? What are they doing that keeps them doing that work? And what we see is that capacity to be able to have some fun and to be able to find joy and find calmness. And that doesn't mean that we're stopping what we're working on. It really doesn't. It just means that you're being able to have the ability to take care of yourself so that you can try to take care of others. Yeah. It's hard. It's hard. I have days when I cannot get off the sofa, and I just say it is too much. The world is too much for me today. I am grabbing a book. I love good science fiction. Like, I am escaping to a planet where everything is different, and I'm going to spend 3 hours in the bed with the cats on my feet purring like crazy, because they are good medicine, and reading this and drinking some tea. And after I do that, and after I've brought my body back, and after I've cried and I've sobbed about what's going on, well, pull myself out of that bed, and I'm going to go do, whatever's next on my list that I need to do. Yeah.
Well, yes, I love that. Definitely self-care, right? We don't have to be on all the time. I mean, we can't be. Nobody can be on all the time. And I think I think about that too. I might go out with a friend, and I might, well, that judge will come and say, why didn't he say more? But why? I don't have to be an activist 24/7. I am allowed to go out and have fun with my friend and not talk about that. And sometimes that's the best thing. I mean, I know it's the best thing for me because I need a break. And also, they probably don't want to hear it every time they're with me. They know who I am. They know my beliefs. So allowing myself to take off that hat of animal activist for a little while and just be a 5-year-old kid, like you're talking about with the Dalai Lama
Yeah.
and right. So yeah.
I think it can. And I think that one of the things that prevents people from seeing some of the things that we'd like them to see is the belief that once they see them, they won't be able to unsee them, and that they'll no longer be able to live a life that is happy and joyous. And if we're able to model that you can see all of the horrible things that are going on in the world, and you still will be able to lead a life that is going towards the goals of your values, but is enjoyable in the midst of all of that. We model that becoming an activist or becoming an advocate or becoming whatever word you're using, might be something you might want to do. It might be something like, so Sarah talks about squirrels entirely too much. I really do. I talk about squirrels all the time, and we're a half hour in now, and I haven't said the word squirrel. And so people who know me are like, when's you going to talk about squirrels? And I talk about squirrels a lot, so much that my students in the animal chaplaincy training program got me a doctorate of squirrels this past year to bestow upon me. But I love squirrels because they bounce and they're joyous and they're outside my my window on the tree. They do this thing called splooting, where they like lie flat on their stomach with their arms and their legs straight out, like they've just like collapsed like this. They bring me a smile, and so I love them. And at the same time, I live in an area where there's a whole lot of roadkill. And I pick up a whole lot of roadkill, and I pick it up and I take it off the road, and I cover them in some little leaves I push over, and I give them a little blessing, and I'm saying, I'm so sorry about us humans and our cars, and my God, I hope you have a most auspicious next lifetime. And I might even add, may the force be with you, because you can be over 50 and still believe the force might be with us. So, so I have this relationship that I like to talk about with squirrels, where squirrels bring me so much joy and squirrels bring me so much heartache. And those two things can coexist. It's the same way that I can have an amazing, joyful experience with a cow, and I can have an amazing, heartbreaking experience with a cow as well, too. And so, being able to see that fullness, so I do talk a lot about squirrels, and I have learned, interesting for all now, in some states, it's okay to shoot squirrels. In other states, there's a city in Washington that has bridges over their roads that are squirrel sized for squirrels to cross over. It's got the Nutty Narrows is the first bridge that was created by a guy who was tired of seeing dead squirrels on the road. And so he took a couple $1,000s and he built this overpass for squirrels. And then they built some more, and there's like 12 in this town, and they have a squirrel festival every year. And I went to visit, and we're looking at the squirrels, and there's a woman and a man in a car next to me, like, having like a little picnic and watching the squirrels. And I couldn't help it. I knocked on their door and I'm like, what are you guys doing? And they said, well, we come here every Friday for our date. And we have a little picnic in our car and we watch the squirrels. I thought, I found my people. Wow. You're, and I think that's also part of being an animal advocate or an activist or a vegan educator or any of these things, is also letting people know about how amazingly wonderful animals are as well. Sometimes we forget to talk about the animals themselves and the ones that are doing okay, because we fear that if we spend time talking about the ones that are doing okay, that we're taking time away from the ones that aren't. But that's what gives us hope.
You're right, it is. And I love this whole, it's not black and white, all these gray areas that you're bringing in.
Yeah. Do you find that too? Do you find that it's more useful when you look at the complexity? Where do you find there's a good question. Wait, I'm flipping the interview. Where do you find that you get into black and white thinking? I know where I get into it. Do you know where you get into it?
Not offhand. No, not offhand. Right now, I mean, it's hard for me to think. I can't stop thinking about.
It's hard to think of. Yeah, it's hard to think on the spot about that. But that's a question I'd send to all of you who are watching this. Like, where do you get into black and white thinking?
Well, I think, in the eating department a lot, with all these food addictions, like, oh my gosh, here we go again, that cake, like I'm going to make a cake and cupcakes for my brother for his birthday tomorrow. I think, oh, you're going to be eating all these cupcakes. It can't be like, oh, I might just have 1/2 of a cupcake. It's going to like, oh, you're going to eat 2 cup or 3 or 4 cupcakes, right? Instead of, why not just allow it to be what it is? I allow it to be what it is and not think all or nothing, right?
Yeah, I'll do that. I can be very hard on myself. Does anyone do that? Anyone be very hard on yourself? And you can finish having a conversation with someone. I do this very often. I'll finish having a conversation. I may even do it after we have this podcast, and I'll say, "Oh, why did I say that? And why didn't I say that?" And and I do this a lot. And it's that hindsight that kind of comes up, and I'll be like, oh, that was horrible. Oh, I just did everything wrong. Or I'll be teaching something. It's like, oh, that wasn't what I intended to teach. Why did I go talking about squirrels again for 30 minutes? And having to be gentle with myself and saying, just trust that whatever is coming out of my mouth is useful to someone, not necessarily everyone, but someone, and to be a little more gentle on myself. So whenever I get into that black and white thinking, it can also happen with, and I see this a lot in vegan conversations, a very much us them kind of attitude that really hurts. That really hurts to watch, where conversations where people group others into categories like meat eaters, right?
Right.
Which is not a fair assessment, honestly, of people who are much more complex than being just a meat eater. And being able to, you just create a barrier, or religious people, or right, like religious people always do such and such, or meat eaters always do such and such. And I think it's a real challenge. That's us speaking from hurt, often, and it's us speaking from the inability to embrace complexity. That's what we learn in trauma stewardship, the inability to embrace complexity, that people are multifaceted, and that when we categorize them into something that is other, that we shut down the ability to have a conversation with each other and to start to learn from each other, because we've othered them in some ways. So that, that's the kind of thing that I think we can get into. I saw something the other day that really broke my heart, where someone had posted something, someone who's an animal advocate in one area, but is not a vegan advocate, but is working on animal issues in another area. And someone had posted on their feed, "Are you a vegan yet? If you're not, you're a hypocrite." And my heart broke, because I thought, I understand what was driving that person's comment. And at the same time, what you've done is you've probably just reduced the ability that person even wants to head that way, because of that kind of thing. And I know it's hard not to do sometimes when people are feeling triggered and people are feeling activated. So for me, that's where spiritual practice comes back in, where I find myself like wanting to really go at it on someone's feed. And I have to say, all right, if I'm feeling like my blood pressure has risen, if I'm feeling really angry, if I'm feeling like I have to act now, if I'm feeling pressured, I am mad, that what I really need to do is to take 15 minutes to go sit outside and breathe and have a cup of tea, and maybe write my response down 1, 2, 3 times, maybe come back to it a little more, finesse what I want to say, and then do that. But when we respond out of activation, or we respond what we used to call triggering, but we don't call it that anymore, because of gun violence. But when we're activated, that, taking a little time to breathe. And I think that's where spirituality comes back into this again, or prayer, for people who prayer is useful. There's this, I have a really great prayer I'll share with you all, which is, please help me keep my mouth shut for 15 minutes. That's one of my favorite prayers.
That's a great one.
A great one, right? That, that's a pretty open-ended one for people of any walk of life. Please help me just calm down for a few minutes before I respond, so I can respond with compassion. I think that's important too.
It is very important, because when we're labeling, when we say, "Oh, well, you're a hypocrite," right? So they can't get out of that. We've already said, this is who you are. This is what my belief about you. It's just, or you're a meat eater. How can they come up out of that? It's just so debilitating to our cause. And I know,
it is. I think so. There's a word that for my students, that I often suggest as a replacement for hypocrite, which is the word inconsistent.
I love that.
That's what we really mean is, and being able to say to someone, instead of "you're a hypocrite," which is labeling someone something they can't get out. I mean, like, there's just,
Right.
that comes out of anger, right? Like we know that's not going to work. No,
Right.
it's not going to work. And it's intended to shame.
Yes, I feel horrible just hearing you say it.
Yeah,
Right?
I'm sorry. I take
No,
it back.
that's
I take it
okay.
back.
I'm not a hypocrite.
But we do it all the time. But being able to say instead,
Uh-huh.
I'm noticing some inconsistency in the way that you're approaching A and the way that you approach B. Could you help me understand? Do you see that? Or do you, how do you work with that in your life? Is it something that doesn't bother you? Is it something that, you'd want to look at? Like, I'm noticing an inconsistency here. It's a softer language that can open up, something. To my husband, I'm noticing some inconsistency with where you put the dirty dishes. That I don't know. It still may not work, but the idea of being able to speak to inconsistency, to speak to our own responses or reactions to things, I think languaging is such an important piece of what we all need to learn. And just being, if we're going to be compassionate, I'm part of an organization called Compassion Consortium, which was founded for people who are vegans and vegetarians and animal activists and animal care professionals, all of those of us who are interested in these kind of concerns. And we meet once a month to do spiritual practice and to do, we do a little prayer-ish. We do a little meditation. We have a guest that comes and speaks. We do all sorts of different things to try to help sustain our resilience. But to also talk about some of these topics that are coming up. And we always say, it's about coming from compassion, even in those conversations that are really difficult. And if we're not being compassionate to the people that we're talking to, well, hey, then we're being inconsistent, right? I won't use the H word.
Yes, I love it. No, I love it because I was thinking about that, right?
Yeah.
I've got to hold myself accountable for being consistent, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
and we're all inconsistent, all inconsistent. We all are. I often talk about this. One of the things that keeps me so very, very humble in life is that I drive a car. Okay. I drive a car. I also don't drive a hybrid or electric car yet. Because I don't want my car, which still has life in it, to go to the landfill quite yet. But I drive a car. And every time I get in that car, I know that I am causing risk and probably harm to a lot of winged beings who are flying around just doing their thing. Okay, tiny little winged beings. I read a study that said that about 6.2 of them land on our license plate per mile. And that broke my heart. I don't know if it's quite that high or not. But, I think after a long drive, I look at my windshield and I go, oh my God, I want to be a Jane and stop driving my car. And so, someday I may get to the point where I give up driving my car. I have stopped driving so much at night because I don't like that the little winged ones are attracted to my headlights and come towards me into the car. So I try not to drive at night as much and things like that. Now, to some people who may be listening, they're like, wow, she's taking this too far. But as our circle of compassion starts to grow, you start thinking about stuff. You start thinking about like, oh gosh, here's another area of my life. And so it's very hard for me to kind of lob angry, blaming, shameful language at someone when I'm aware that I'm not living as nonviolently as I would like to. And so I'm able to see the areas where I still haven't made change that I wish it could. And I haven't yet. And someday I hope that I'm going to, but to be able to be humble and to see that we are all trying to do things, and we can have a great commitment to wanting to do something and still not do it. We can really, really want to do something and still not do it. And that is that is how humans work. And, being aware of that and not being so simplistic to think if people really cared, they would stop doing X, Y, Z. People do care. And it's not that they don't care enough, is that change can be very difficult for us. And so trying to help people understand in small pieces how to compassionately change and enable them. And if any of you have any tips for how I can stop driving, don't tell me to get a bicycle, because I have to go like 75 miles back and forth every day. But help me out. And if we can help each other out with these things, I think that is, well, that would be a chaplain's advice, right? So there's a distinction between a hardcore activist and a chaplain, but I'm always going to be trying to come from a place of open-heartedness and a place of compassion and a place of comfort. I do think that there is a role in the world for incredibly provocative and disturbing activism as well. I do. That's not my particular role. And, we each have to find our way of doing this work.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Definitely. Again, it's not all black or white. I think when we're talking to big corporations, there's different ways to address corporations and individuals, and it's not all. It's very complicated, and I love that you're addressing that. There's
yeah. Well, sometimes you can be fierce and compassionate at the same time.
Right. You can
be fierce and compassionate at the same time. And so, I've been involved in, we've done a number of, the Compassion Consortium, we were just involved in a group letter for multiple organizations who are involved, who are religious organizations and spiritual organizations who are involved in animal advocacy. There's tons of us out there doing things in religious and spiritual spheres, and there are some coalitions, the Interfaith Vegan Coalition, the Animal Interfaith Alliance, some different organizations like this who are made up of other member groups in specific religions, and we're involved in writing a letter to Pope Francis about his latest encyclical and the absence of talking about industrialized agriculture and animal culture in there. And so we get involved in letter writing, we get involved in advocacy, in actions, in things like that as well, but try to do so with a lot of strategic thinking and coming from a place that someone can hear what we're writing. That it's not written 100% in anger, but that it's written very clearly and very strategically. Is the best we can do. Oh, someone in the chat has a tip for me.
Yes, I see it.
Yeah, so I'm going to read it to anybody who's in the future. Okay, here we go. You would need a wind diverter to create an air gap between the vehicle and insects. That's brilliant. Does that exist?
I don't know, but we got to find out.
We're going to find out, because see that I like how you are thinking there, right? Thinking about what do we do if Sarah can't stop driving her car, what other options do we have for Sarah? And so I appreciate that. Thank you so much for that tip. And I'm gonna do a little Googling on that one.
Well, we got another comment here from JJ. She's talking about, what she's saying. I told you about that moment, Mariquita, with me and Neo, her cat, and our other cat, Minu, is really peaceful. I love when I can spend time with him. I cannot yet in the same room while they are territorial of me. Yeah, cats.
Yeah, cats. I love them.
You gotta love them.
Gotta love cats. And I think that what you're speaking to there as well is the understanding the personalities and the individualism of different animals and what they have and what they're capable of, what their needs are. Not presuming that all animals are the same or all species are the same. I think that happens a lot in the work that I do around animal death, which, we didn't dig into that topic today, but a lot of the work that I do in my book, Sacred Sendoffs, is really involved in how do we deal with our grief? How do we handle grief around companion animal loss? How do we handle grief as advocates or activists around things that we see happening and aren't changing as fast as we'd like them to? What do we do about the squirrel on the side of the road? How
Right.
do we work with our grief? Because that's a lot of what drives our anger and our hopelessness and our depression. Yeah.
What would you say to some person? I mean, someone that's still, that after their pet's passing, here we are. But I mean, that's still very heavily grieving and they don't know how to come out of that grief like a year later, 2 years later, and it's hurting them so much. What would you say to that person to help them?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. So the first thing is that grief isn't something that we get rid of, and it's not something that ends. It's something that the volume comes down on. So I still miss, oh, little orange ginger cat Max. Still miss him. My heart can still drop when I think about him. I can still have grief. The volume is lower than it was 5 years ago when I lost him. So what we need to do is to learn to live with the fact that we don't have them next to us anymore. And we need to clean up any of the things that are bothering us, that are preventing us from being able to turn that volume down. And often that is guilt. Something may have happened in that loss that went the way that we didn't want it to go, or we think we might be complicit. I have a cat who died with diabetes. I had a lot of guilt about that and about my role in feeding him before I knew how to feed cats better. It can be anger, or anger at a veterinarian, for example, who didn't do something we wanted them to do, and we think there might be suffering. So we need to dig into, there might be something, and most of the time, if we're still really, really grieving a year later, beyond the kind of missing and moments of sadness, but if it's a daily occurrence, we probably have complicated grief. And you might need to talk to an animal chaplain, to a therapist, to a loss specialist about that. There's something in there that isn't finished. There's some kind of work around guilt or shame or regret. And what we know through research is that talking with someone about it helps. Talking with someone about it helps. We also know that getting support, a grief group or one-on-one support helps. We know that doing ritual helps. So I have at sacredsendoffs.com, we have a ritual kit. So different exercises based in nature-based practices that help you move through grief. So that might be something that I would recommend to someone. Maybe having a funeral or a memorial, or what I like to call a furry wake, which is getting people together and talking about it. So grief is not linear. It comes back at us. And so get support. That's what it all comes down to, Mariquita. It's get support for that. No, it's not silly, and it's not wrong, and it's not crazy. A word I don't like to use very often, but a year later to still be grieving someone who was one of your family members. No, it's not. You just need some support. We do have a directory if anyone's listening out here. I know I've just thrown a bunch of URLs out at folks.
I want you to, give it all out, right? Give it
Yeah,
all out.
we do. So we have a directory, findanimalchaplain.com, that can help you. You type in your zip code and you can find an animal chaplain near you who can help you with stuff. Animal chaplains come without their beliefs. They come, to support you in your beliefs. So, whether you're spiritual or religious, or you're non-religious, or, whatever, a chaplain may be able to support you. If you're an activist or an advocate who's feeling lonely and on your own and wanting a community of support, check us out at compassionconsortium.org. We get together every month and we talk about this stuff and we support each other, and we might be able to be a support to you. And if you're interested in all the ethical quandaries and mess that we've been talking about here and want to read more about that, Sacred Sendoffs, the book's available anywhere you get books, or at sacredsendoffs.com. So that's some resources for folks. I hope that what we've been talking about has been useful to people. I hope it makes you much more interested in squirrels. And I also hope it helps you be gentle with yourself and gentle with others. We can be fierce and compassionate at the same time, so that we can keep doing the important work we're doing. Whatever you are doing out there in the world, for animals, for humans, for habitats, thank you.
Beautiful. Yes. And then, we've got So first we needed to show this comment. It would need to be invented, the wind diverter.
Yes.
So we can all start working on that.
We need to start working on that, because insects, actually, the greatest number of beings on the planet who are being killed are insects. It's not livestock. It's actually livestock. Again, another one of those words we don't like, right?
Right.
But it's actually insects. So yeah, it's something to think about.
Yeah, something to next project. All right. So Compassion Consortium.
Yes, compassionconsortium.org.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right. So I really hope, I mean, this has gone so quickly. I've learned so much. And really what I loved was that, so we're not using the H word. We're using
we're asking people to help us understand the inconsistency.
Right. Inconsistency, the I word.
And knowing that we are also inconsistent.
Right. I love it. Okay, great.
Thank you for this stuff. This was so delightful meeting you. And thank you for the work that you do, Mariquita, with empowering people and being able to work with these kind of topics. Again, being able to, I know you've got some different types of coaching things and groups and individual work that you do. And thank you for doing that, because we cannot do this alone.
We can't. And only like 1% of us are activists. So yeah, you're right. So we got to get out there. Yes. And I've got, like I said, the group coaching is coming, and we're focusing on the wisdom of animals starting in November. So reach out to me, and please check out all of Sarah's links. And I see your book on the back, Sacred Sendoff, behind you. Please, we need to empower ourselves, really be healing and compassionate to ourselves first. And that way we share compassion, and our voice is greater. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Bye, folks.
Bye, everybody.